Before we begin today's story, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. People often believe that prison destroys a man completely, but what they don't realize is that sometimes prison only pauses one story while secretly starting another. Ethan Miller never imagined his life would take such a brutal turn. Just a year ago, he was standing on the top floor of his glass office building, looking down at the city he believed he had conquered. His business empire was built on trust, sharp instincts, and years of sleepless nights. Investors respected him, employees followed him loyally, and competitors watched him carefully, waiting for a single mistake. At home, he had a quiet, almost invisible support system, his wife, Laura. To the outside world, Laura was nothing more than a soft-spoken woman who stayed away from business discussions, someone who smiled politely and avoided attention. No one saw her as a threat, not even Ethan himself. The downfall began on a morning that looked ordinary. Ethan was reviewing contracts when the doorbell rang repeatedly, louder and more aggressive than usual. Federal agents stood outside with documents already prepared, faces cold and emotionless. The accusations came fast: fraud, illegal transactions, hidden accounts, and manipulation of company funds. Ethan tried to explain, tried to understand, but explanations didn't matter. Evidence spoke louder than truth. Documents bearing his signature, transfers traced back to his companies, and witnesses who claimed they had followed his instructions. By evening, his name was splashed across news channels, and by night, he was locked inside a cell that smelled of rust and despair. Laura watched everything fall apart in silence. She cried when people were watching, broke down in courtrooms, and appeared helpless during interviews. Neighbors pitied her. Business rivals ignored her. Creditors treated her like a burden. Everyone assumed she would disappear once the last account was frozen. But what no one understood was that Laura was observing every single detail. She listened carefully when lawyers spoke. She memorized faces in courtrooms. She noticed inconsistencies that others overlooked. While Ethan struggled to survive behind bars, Laura was learning how power truly worked. Prison life forced Ethan into a routine of survival. Days blurred into nights, and nights turned into endless thoughts. He replayed his arrest, repeatedly searching for a logical explanation. Someone had access to his systems, someone knew his weaknesses, and someone had patiently waited for the perfect moment to strike. Letters from Laura were short but strangely calm. She never spoke about fear or failure. Instead, she wrote about handling things and keeping matters under control. Ethan found that unsettling. The Laura he remembered would have been overwhelmed, broken, lost. This Laura sounded focused, almost prepared. Outside, Laura slowly stepped into the world Ethan once dominated. She entered boardrooms where men underestimated her presence. She allowed them to believe she was confused, emotional, and inexperienced. That illusion became her greatest weapon. While they talked freely in front of her, she gathered information. While they dismissed her questions, she uncovered loopholes. Within months, she discovered that Ethan's downfall wasn't the result of one enemy but several, partners who smiled in public and planned destruction in private. Instead of exposing them immediately, Laura made a decision that would change everything. She rebuilt quietly. Using legal gaps and remaining resources, she launched a new company under a name that attracted no attention. No headlines, no announcements, just steady movement. She hired people who owed nothing to Ethan's past and trusted no one fully. Money began circulating again, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. The same men who once celebrated Ethan's arrest unknowingly started doing business with Laura's new enterprise, never realizing who stood behind it. Months passed. Laura's transformation became complete. She no longer dressed like a grieving wife. She spoke with authority, negotiated with precision, and planned 10 steps ahead. Every contract she signed brought her closer to the truth. Every partnership revealed another layer of betrayal. Meanwhile, Ethan remained unaware of how powerful his wife had become. To him, Laura was still the woman waiting at home, counting days until his release. Then one evening, Ethan received a letter that changed his perception forever. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't comforting. It was calculated. "Trust me," it read. "Everything is unfolding exactly as it should." That single sentence sent a chill through him. For the first time, Ethan questioned whether his imprisonment was truly the worst part of the story or merely the beginning of something far more dangerous. What Ethan didn't know yet was that Laura wasn't just rebuilding what was lost. She was redesigning the entire game. And by the time he discovered the full truth, he would be forced to confront a reality far more shocking than prison itself. The first real crack in Ethan's understanding of reality came weeks later, during a routine prison call. Laura's voice on the other end of the line was calm, too calm. She didn't ask how he was sleeping, didn't talk about missing him, and didn't complain about the loneliness everyone expected her to feel. Instead, she spoke in short, controlled sentences, updating him on things he never imagined she would handle. She mentioned negotiations, supplier changes, and strategic adjustments, words she had never used before his arrest. Ethan listened in silence, a strange heaviness forming in his chest. When the call ended, he sat on his bunk staring at the wall, realizing that the woman he loved was evolving faster than he could comprehend. Outside, Laura was no longer pretending to be lost. The new company she had built began attracting attention, not from the media, but from powerful circles that preferred to stay invisible. Investors who once rejected Ethan now requested private meetings with her. She controlled the narrative carefully, never revealing her full plans. Every meeting was recorded in her mind, every promise weighed, every threat quietly noted. She learned who needed money, who needed protection, and who needed silence. Power, she realized, wasn't loud. It moved quietly, just like she did. Meanwhile, Ethan's name slowly faded from public discussion. The world labeled him a criminal and moved on. Inside prison, he learned to survive among men who had lost everything. Yet, despite the harsh environment, something inside him refused to break. He worked out daily, read obsessively, and studied law books borrowed from the prison library. If the system had crushed him once, he would understand it well enough to never let it happen again. But even as he strengthened himself, a growing fear followed him. What if Laura no longer needed him? Laura's rise wasn't accidental. She began reconnecting with people from Ethan's past, not as his wife, but as an independent force. Some were cooperative, others nervous. A few tried to intimidate her. None succeeded. She had learned patience. She let her enemies believe they were in control while she quietly positioned herself at the center of their operations. One by one, she gathered evidence, emails, recorded conversations, financial trails, pieces of a puzzle that pointed directly to the people who had framed Ethan. But there was something even darker beneath the surface. During one late-night review of documents, Laura discovered a file that made her hands shake. A transaction dated months before Ethan's arrest carried a signature that wasn't his, but it had been verified using internal access. Someone close to Ethan had opened the door. Someone he trusted completely. Laura didn't cry. She didn't scream. She closed the file, took a deep breath, and understood that the truth would destroy more than one life when it finally came out. She began visiting Ethan less frequently. Not because she didn't care, but because distance was becoming necessary. The less people associated her actions with him, the safer her plans became. Ethan noticed the change immediately. Her absence weighed on him heavier than prison walls. Doubt crept in. Was she moving on? Was she becoming someone else entirely? Or was she hiding something from him? The answer was more dangerous than he imagined. Laura wasn't just planning to free Ethan, she was planning to take control of everything that had once destroyed him. She wanted justice, but on her terms. Legal justice was slow and uncertain. Her method was precise, patient, and ruthless. She had learned that exposing the truth too early would only get her silenced. So she waited. She built alliances. She expanded influence, and she prepared for the moment when the truth would no longer be ignored. One evening, Ethan received another letter. This time it was longer. It spoke of timing, of trust, and of sacrifice. The final line stayed with him long after he folded the paper. Some truths save people, others burn everything down. For the first time since his arrest, Ethan felt afraid, not of prison, but of what awaited him outside. Because whatever Laura was becoming, it was far more powerful than the woman who had once stood silently behind him. And the closer she came to exposing the real villains, the more dangerous her world became. The closer Laura moved toward the truth, the more isolated she became. Power had a price, and she was paying it quietly. Meetings now happened behind locked doors, phones were left outside rooms, and trust was treated like a temporary arrangement rather than a permanent bond. She noticed eyes following her when she left buildings, unfamiliar cars parked too long near her office, and sudden changes in behavior from people who once smiled too easily. The message was clear. She was no longer invisible. Someone had realized she was more than just a businesswoman trying to survive. Inside prison, Ethan sensed the shift before he could explain it. Laura's letters became less frequent, and when they arrived, they were carefully worded, almost coded. She no longer spoke about progress or plans. Instead, she reminded him to stay patient, to stay strong, and to trust her judgment completely. That word, trust, echoed painfully in his mind. Trust was what had destroyed him once. Now it was all he had left. Laura's investigation finally led her to a name she had hoped never to see: Daniel Cross, Ethan's former financial advisor, a man who had attended their wedding, sat at their dinner table, and called Ethan his brother. Daniel had been the one managing offshore structures, the one with full system access, the one who knew exactly how to make fake transactions look real. The evidence was undeniable. Daniel hadn't acted alone, but he had been the key. The betrayal cut deeper than Laura expected, not because of business, but because of intimacy. Instead of confronting him, Laura approached Daniel with a proposal. She requested a private meeting, acting as if she needed guidance. Daniel agreed, confident and careless, believing he still held power over the situation. During their conversation, Laura played the role perfectly, uncertain, overwhelmed, dependent. Daniel talked freely, revealing more than he realized. He spoke of necessary sacrifices and collateral damage, justifying Ethan's imprisonment as an unfortunate but profitable outcome. Laura recorded everything. Every word became another nail in his future. But Daniel wasn't stupid. Days later, he realized Laura was no longer acting like a victim. His tone changed. Subtle threats replaced friendly advice. He warned her to stop digging, to enjoy her success quietly, and to remember what happened to people who asked too many questions. Laura smiled and agreed. That night, she moved all critical evidence to secure locations and prepared for escalation. The pressure intensified. One of her warehouses was suddenly audited. A key supplier backed out without explanation. Anonymous messages began appearing on her phone, reminding her that accidents happen to people who push too hard. Laura understood the signal. She had reached the edge of their tolerance. Instead of backing down, she made her boldest move yet. Using her growing influence, Laura arranged a deal that would expose the financial network behind Ethan's conviction, without directly naming anyone. She leaked just enough information to trigger internal conflicts among the conspirators. Greed did the rest. Partners turned on each other. Old alliances fractured. The system that had once crushed Ethan began collapsing under its own weight. In prison, Ethan felt the change in an unexpected way. Guards treated him differently. His name resurfaced in quiet conversations. A lawyer he had never met requested a visit. The man didn't promise freedom, but he hinted at something far more powerful, a reopening of the case. Ethan's heart raced. For the first time in years, hope felt real, not imagined. But hope came with fear, because Ethan still didn't know the full cost of Laura's actions. He didn't know how close she had come to danger. And he didn't know the final truth Laura was hiding from him, the one secret that, if revealed, could either set him free or destroy whatever remained of their marriage. Laura stood alone in her office late one night, staring at the city lights. Everything was in motion now. There was no turning back. She whispered a single sentence to herself, not out of fear but resolve. "This ends on my terms." What she didn't realize was that Daniel Cross had made a decision of his own. And his next move would force Laura to choose between justice and survival. Time has a way of revealing truths without raising its voice. Months after the silent war reached its peak, the world slowly began to change its tone. Investigations reopened. Financial trails once buried under influence surfaced again, clearer than ever. One by one, names connected to Ethan's conviction were quietly removed from powerful positions. No dramatic headlines, no public apologies, just silent disappearances. Daniel Cross was arrested without cameras, without speeches, without dignity. The man who had once destroyed a life was now reduced to a file number in a system he thought he controlled. Ethan walked out of prison on an ordinary afternoon. No crowd waited for him. No reporters shouted questions. Just open air, freedom, and a calm he had forgotten existed. Laura stood at a distance, not rushing, not crying. When their eyes met, there were no words that could explain the years they had lost. They simply stood there, understanding that some journeys change people forever. They never returned to their old life. The mansion was sold. The past was left untouched. Laura stepped away from the empire she had built, handing control to people she trusted. Ethan refused to reclaim power, knowing now the true cost of ambition without awareness. Together, they chose something quieter, something real. Not revenge, not victory, just peace. Some truths were never spoken between them. Some sacrifices were never explained. And some victories were meant to remain unseen. Because not every battle needs an audience, and not every hero needs recognition. In the end, the world moved on. But the lesson remained. Sometimes the strongest power is not in fighting back loudly, but in surviving silently. If this story made you think, if it made you feel something, then don't forget to like share and subscribe to the channel. Because more powerful stories like this are coming next.